On the 22nd anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks against the United States, sitting Republican Congresswoman and mega-cultist Marjorie Taylor Greene decided, instead of using her platform to offer like an aspirational or inspirational message of unity for every American, that she would instead use the opportunity to attack President Biden and blame him for the debacle in Afghanistan. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. Maybe check out my Patreon. I'd appreciate the support. All right, folks, so this is the anniversary, the 22nd anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks. And as any person who is an office holder, Democrat or Republican, will offer some sort of written statement or verbal statement on this anniversary. It was a major event in the history of this country. Marjorie Taylor Greene is no exception. She offered a written statement on X on the anniversary. It's really not so much a commemoration or a tribute to what happened and the lives lost on 9/11, so much as it is an attempt to redirect and blame President Biden for a conflict which spanned multiple administrations, Republican and Democrat, and then Biden alone got us out of. So the statement is, today, we remember the lives taken from us by the hands of Islamic terrorism 22 years ago. Americans are still dying and suffering from the toxic chemicals and dust they endured after the buildings fell. We'll get to that in a second. Let us also not forget the betrayal of everyone who died that fateful day by the Biden administration, who handed over weapons and ceded the territory we held in the Middle East to the Taliban, who works with al-Qaeda, the very enemy we sought to defeat after decades of fighting and lost American lives. Interesting. So we're going to start with the first claim. Americans are still dying and suffering from the toxic chemicals and dust they endured after the buildings fell. Well, you may recall in 2018, it was Jon Stewart, progressive, hippie liberal soy Jon Stewart, who we all love, rightly so, who actually made the case that Republicans in particular, with an excellent speech in Congress, were playing political football with funding that expanded and increased health care for 9/11 first responders. It was Republicans uniquely holding that up to try to use it for their own political advantage. So she has no credibility in that respect because it was her party that was weaponizing the health care of 9/11 first responders, despicably so. They also did the same thing with military veterans in Afghanistan. With the PACT Act, Republicans tried to sabotage the PACT Act, which again expanded and increased health care for veterans in Afghanistan. And again, they have no credibility. Republicans have no credibility on this issue, and that includes Marjorie Taylor Greene. But with respect to the comments about Afghanistan, okay, so just going to remind everybody, because this is a really sore subject for me, because you know, this was really the turning point for President Biden's administration with respect to his approval rating. So as a reminder, the Afghanistan war spanned 4 administrations: George W. Bush, Republican; Barack Obama, Democrat; Donald Trump, Republican; and then it concluded with Democrat Joe Biden. It was Donald Trump who actually did kind of the right thing, I mean, by publicly working to get us out of the Afghanistan war. Now, he promised he'd get us out. He waited until the last minute, but it was his administration that made the Doha Agreement, where they made a direct deal with the Taliban that Marjorie Taylor Greene in this tweet is talking about, our enemy. Well, it was Donald Trump who made a direct deal with the Taliban. He cut out the Afghan government. He made a direct deal with the Taliban and said, look, we're getting out. Okay, Donald Trump made that commitment. Donald Trump failed to enforce that deal. He honored, for the first time in his life, serial philanderer and betrayer Donald Trump, for the first time in his life, honored a commitment to somebody, and it was the Taliban. He gave the Taliban everything they wanted, and in return, the Taliban did nothing for us except not shoot U.S. troops. But there were other conditions they were supposed to meet as well that they failed to. So Donald Trump gave the Taliban everything they wanted in his last year in office. He also released 5,000 Taliban prisoners, prisoners who were Taliban, and gave them back to the Taliban, 5,000, while at the same time retrograding U.S. personnel from 13,000 down to 2,500. So again, if that math checks out, Donald Trump gave our enemy, the Taliban, twice as many troops as he left in Afghanistan by the time he left office. Now, while simultaneously undercutting the confidence of the Afghan government. So Donald Trump created a mess, left office, and gave it to Joe Biden to execute. Joe Biden's options were effectively to reinvade the country or to try to get out based on the commitment that the Trump administration made. And that's what Joe Biden did. And yes, it's true, 13 U.S. service people tragically lost their lives that last day in Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. But more U.S. service people died in Afghanistan under Trump. It was something like 60, 65 plus on Trump's watch. So even by that metric, Trump is worse. Joe Biden was set up for failure by Donald Trump. But Joe Biden still did the right thing and got us out instead of reinvading the country. So when Marjorie Taylor Greene says things like Joe Biden gave up Afghanistan to the Taliban, no. Donald Trump made that commitment. Donald Trump said we're giving Afghanistan effectively back to the Taliban. But she's blaming Joe Biden for it because, of course, she's a liar. Now, the last thing I want to point out, because you hear this claim quite a bit, is Joe Biden gave the Taliban all that equipment. $80 billion is the meme quote. Now, that's not true. But more importantly, let's think about this. Well, actually, first, this is a special inspector general report on the Afghanistan collapse. This is a military report over what happened. And as they conclude in the report with respect to the equipment, the U.S. had not been tracking loaned, sold, or borrowed equipment that they gave the Afghan government. They hadn't been tracking it effectively for years, including under the Trump administration. 2020 Special Inspector General of Afghanistan report concluded that the DoD did not meet its own oversight requirements for monitoring sensitive equipment transferred to the Afghan government, leaving it susceptible to theft or loss. Meaning that this problem predated Joe Biden. It began under the Bush administration, continued under the Obama administration, and indeed continued under the Trump administration. Donald Trump's administration was aware that they were not adequately tracking and documenting all the equipment that they sold or gifted to the Afghan government over a 20-year period. So Donald Trump also bears responsibility for this. Then the question is, okay, well, could Joe Biden have somehow got all that equipment back up? Well, let's think about this. We're talking about a massive country the size of many, many U.S. states being swept by an insurgent force of 80,000, 75,000 insurgents, insurgents that Donald Trump empowered by giving them back 5,000 soldiers effectively. The Afghan government was rapidly collapsing because they were demoralized by Donald Trump's deal and his lack of enforcement of the terms that he demanded that the Taliban honor. And then he leaves Joe Biden 2,500 troops. So I'm not a military expert. Perhaps you are, perhaps you're not. Could Joe Biden with 2,500 troops sweep a country in a limited amount of time, in a country in that context, and get up all the equipment that was not being adequately tracked for 20 years, that was spread all across that country? Could he do that? Obviously not. So it's incredibly dishonest to try to blame Joe Biden for everything that went wrong in Afghanistan. Now, to be sure, he has command responsibility for at least some of it because he was the sitting president at the time of the evacuation. But to just pretend that the issues with Afghanistan began on January 2021 when Joe Biden was inaugurated, as Marjorie Taylor Greene does here, is dishonest. It's incredibly dishonest. Joe Biden ultimately did the right thing when put in an impossible situation. He and the military and the State Department bravely decided that no matter what the circumstances were, they were going to get out of Afghanistan, which is what the American people wanted. Now, again, this is the anniversary of September 11th. Marjorie Taylor Greene had an opportunity here to offer a conciliatory message or a message of unity, which again, lots of terrible things occurred from that unity and patriotism after the September 11th attacks, including the war and occupation in Afghanistan. But there was a real opportunity for a crisis to bring people together, and even the commemoration of a crisis. And instead, Marjorie Taylor Greene only goes on the attack, lies about Joe Biden, lies about the Democrats, lies about the entire situation in Afghanistan, which makes you wonder, does she really care about this country? Obviously not.